I'd like to call the regular meeting of Cobre Board of Education into session. It is 5:10. We're starting a little bit late due to some technical difficulties, or should we say some delay in our communications. Can't hear me? I'd like to start the regular meeting of Cobre Board of Education into session. It was 5:10. We started a little bit late due to our, they were using the auditorium here, and they a little bit late in setting things up. So let the minutes show that all board members are here, and please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I salute the flag of the state of New Mexico, the Zia symbol of perfect friendship among united cultures. Move to action items. Joyce?
The agenda is the ARP revised application. So we did have to really work on revising our narrative and revising the 20% funds. The 20% is supposed to be reserved for learning loss, and so we had some things in there that weren't directly related to learning loss, so we had to make some adjustments to our application. So what we have under 20% for learning loss is an elementary teacher to teach social emotional classes. At the elementary level, we have been doing social emotional classes for 2 years. We started them the year that we went out on remote, but our counselors have been doing that. And so our counselors are being used 1 day a week to teach social emotional classes, and they really need to be supporting small group and individual students with some of their needs. We do have 2 counselors budgeted in there. So the 20% funds, I need to go back and clarify, is for learning loss or to support social emotional needs. Okay, so sorry about that. So when we budgeted the positions, we did budget them in with the additional money for K5 Plus and ELTP. Should we go that route at the individual schools where these people will be housed? We know that we are going to be having K5 Plus at the elementaries because that was a 2-year commitment. We also have SLP services for remote and direct instruction for compensatory services for some of our students who have IEPs and are in need of those services. And we included an additional $42,000 for recovery services for special ed teachers and ancillary staff, again, based on individual student IEPs. So that's the 20%. The other 80%, we are looking to continue our work with Kickboard, and that's looking at growth mindset, positive school culture for 2 years. Possibly looking at a digital behavior tracking system, which would help us to track the behaviors. One of the things that we are required to do with these funds is provide data. And so that tracking system would help us to provide some of the data that we need for the social emotional to see if what we're doing is having an impact. We also budgeted some money for remote learning. In case we have some students who are in need of remote learning next year. We do have a few at the elementary, middle school, and high school who are using remote learning. Elementary kids would also need workbooks. We've budgeted in some additional funding for internet for different groups of students, racial, ethnic groups, low economic, students with disabilities, EL students, and homeless students. We budgeted some additional funding to help support them with internet by using hotspots. and any school supplies, clothing, or hygiene products as needed by individual students. We also budgeted an additional social worker for special education. We put $15,000 in there for high school for CTE classes if they're in need of anything. We budgeted $20,500 for PPE, masks, gloves, dividers, any sanitizer that we may need. We didn't budget a huge amount because we still have some stuff on inventory at this time. We budgeted $27,000 for cleaning contracts, which could include both indoors and outdoors. A custodian for 2 years, a nurse for 2 years, outdoor learning environments, $120,000. We're also looking at additional hotspots, $41,427. Couple of computer programs, Go Guardian, which our technology department uses to help support staff and students at a distance. Staff laptop replacement for 2 years. Infrastructure for Bayard and Central Elementary, which is to improve the wireless access points. Technology needs for remote learning, $6,000. Looking at $66,000 for charging stations, chargers, or Chromebook replacement. Additional funds for at-risk coordinator. And then planning for summer learning and after-school programs. Most of our after-school programs are covered through ELTP, which is Extended Learning Time Program. But we do have Snell Middle School and Cobre High School who want to offer some summer learning, so we budgeted some money in for that. And then we budgeted an additional $24,000 for professional development for math for elementary and high school for student engagement. Looking at the district strategic plan and board retreat, $13,000. An EA at Foy Daycare. Also for our attendance success coach for 2 years. And then other staff salaries, which would be partially my salary, partially Mr. Peru's salary, since we do work directly with the facilities and the grant. And then 3 additional EA positions, which does not necessarily mean additional EA positions, but 3 EA positions that would be funded out of CARES. So, Mr. President, I recommend approval of the CARES 3 ARP grant application as presented.
You heard the recommendation. Do I hear a motion? Motion by Mr. Cordova, second. Second by Ms. Murillo. Any questions?
I have a question. A few, actually. We've had this material now for 2 weeks. And the question is, how much of a review of this went through the Finance Committee? I've seen the emails that have gone back and forth. I've seen the lack of response from the president of the Finance Committee to the committee member. And this is $2 million worth of funding. It has several positions, some new positions. The responsibility for the board, for the Finance Committee to look at those, verify the sufficiency of the funding, and also for the board to be engaged in the direction to which this funding is going. And one of the questions that I have about the function of this is that we currently are not providing remote learning in classrooms for students that choose to go remote. We are currently contracting, I believe, with Ingenuity to provide that. A complete disconnect from the current curriculum Although last year, we did have our teachers providing the remote learning, which allows for greater continuity and less disruption socially as well as educationally. And being that the purpose of this grant is to address those deficiencies, are we going to continue with ingenuity, or are we going to have the teachers to be able to facilitate remote learners while they're in the classroom with the in-class?
So this did not go through Finance Committee. We did, however, have a meeting with all our principals, and they did provide input into the grant. The plan would be to continue with Edgenuity. At the elementary level, we have a couple of kids that are doing Edgenuity. We do have, even though we're contracted, and we do have a teacher who's providing the instruction and the work for the students on Edgenuity, we do have a local teacher who does keep contact with the parents to make sure if they need any support, she's available to them. We do have some students, I believe right now it's just one student at the middle school who is on Edgenuity as well and does get support from a teacher at Snell Middle School. At the high school, I believe we have 5 kids who are receiving direct services from teachers during teachers are selling their prep or working with students after school to do that. So one of the things that the state did tell us this year, because of the because of the additional duties that are required of teachers who do remote and face-to-face learning simultaneously, we were told by the state that the teachers are not required to do that this year. So we had to find an alternative way to meet the needs of those students who were still going to do remote, and so we chose to go with Edgenuity.
We paint ourselves in a corner pretty often, and when we have 2 IT tech support people supporting the entire districts, that almost by design means we won't be able to do remote. And while we may not be able to require, there were all the teachers were the drivers of the decision the year before, saying they did not want to see the students go to Ingenuity, that they were willing to do that in the classroom. They preferred that because that was the direction we were going. It still is problematic that the board is not exercising its fiduciary responsibility in reviewing a $3 million platform that affects the students, the parents, the community, and also involves making decisions on curriculum, for which we have never done in the entire time that I've been here, and who knows how much before then. It is problematic that we have this come to the board without involvement, and the involvement that is prescribed in our policies, and then be asked to support this without a thorough review and without participation. I appreciate that the teachers and at least the principals seem like they're involved, but that shortcuts, that undercuts our participation. We are to represent the parents, and I think the educators are well represented here in that process by including the principals, but not the parents and not the community, and we fall short on that.
Okay, so I'd like to, I guess, echo what Mr. Guadiana said about my concern with it not going through the Finance Committee. This seems to be a reoccurring thing, and I do know that the committee members want to be involved, and we want to be involved in the process, and I definitely want to be more involved so I understand what's going forward. So I guess my question is, does this have to be approved today or can we wait to go through the Finance Committee to approve it?
We have a deadline. That's why we had the special board meeting today, because it has to go to the feds by Wednesday. That's why we had the special board meeting, so that we could get it approved.
Just to give some additional information as far as, this is a revised application, not an initial application. So the initial application for CARES 3 funding was processed through the Finance Committee and also through the board initially. The revisions that are being asked to be made is specifically to the 20%, to the 20%, with more narratives, not necessarily adjustments in the financial piece, as far as moving money from one function to the other, which PED to this point, from the last information that we had, was not requiring a revised bar at this time. We did put it on here just in case that the PED needed a revised bar, a budget adjustment. So if it does go to where, when they start reviewing the application, the revisions on the application, that they're requiring out of function adjustments, we would certainly take it to the Finance Committee. But as to echo what Ms. Varela said, is that this is a special board meeting because the feds want the application as revised by their deadline.
And on the positions that we discussed here, the only position, all the other positions that I discussed were in the original application that did go to finance, that was approved by the board. The only one that's different on here is the teacher for social emotional at the elementary. That was not included in the original application.
But a counselor was, right?
Yes,
So
two counselors, the nurse, the at-risk coordinator, the attendant success coach, the custodian,
the
myself and
instructionalist.
Mr. Peru. So we did have the FOI EA. The 3 EA positions were not on the original application. But pretty much everything else was. We did have Power School that we had included on here in the original application for the online portion, but in meeting with principals and meeting with secretaries, online registration is not working for our district, and so we're going to go back to paper-based next year, so we eliminated that. Staff laptop replacement, infrastructure was included, remote learning was included, recovery services were included. All of those were in the original application.
I have a couple of additional comments. If this was tweaking the previous one, and it's been ready for 2 weeks, I still don't understand why it didn't go to the Finance Committee.
Part of it was staff was on spring break last week. So this was ready on, when did we get it to you? Thursday, Friday? We got it to you Friday. This was Friday, the week before spring break is when we got you your packets. That's when it was ready. And then staff was on spring break last week.
And the data that I see on the state website on the expenditures for this funding shows a very disproportionate amount going to administration and principals from this district compared to any of the neighboring districts, dwarfing any of the districts by far.
You're referring to CARES 2 because CARES 3 has not been expended yet?
Right.
But do you want to explain why?
Right, so when we wrote CARES 2, The CARES 2 was allowable to cover what operational was lacking when we had the COVID allowances as far as what, we couldn't cover on last year's operational budget. So yes, CARES 2 is currently covering at some of the administrative salaries. We could have chosen to cover, existing staff, which was is allowable under the CARES 2 application. So this is CARES 3, it's not CARES 2, and that was also approved as an application last year.
It was approved as an application last year, but I don't recall that disproportionate amount of funding going to administration.
It
principals.
was in there. It's not.
In addition, in the last 3 years,
Listed as salaries.
listed as salaries, but again, the level of review did not distinguish that, how much of it was going to administration?
We did put it on there when we reviewed it with the finance. We did put, Ms. Varela put it all together in the budget spreadsheet when we presented to the finance committee. And you were still on the finance at that point.
I don't remember seeing that amount of money in administration, but
It was.
in light of that, the last 3 years, there's been around $300,000 a year that's been transferred within the budget or spent in excess of what's been approved in the budget that has gone through that have been identified in the annual audit. And all 3 years, we have not received any kind of information of monitoring of the processes, nor to which line items this affected. It's difficult to be a board member and look at the finances when our own board is not reviewing the deficiencies that are found and coming clean with what it is that those movements are made. It's inconceivable to me why those funds weren't transferred via a bar that would have come to our review. And yet we're asked again to approve $2 million worth of spending that may be affected in the similar way. And you alluded to the fact that you're not sure whether bars are going to be necessary for some of the transfers between the line items. That's very troubling, and I think it's a dysfunction of the board to not review to the level and to be participating in the finance committee to this kind of transaction. If it was simply tweaking the previous one, I don't see why that couldn't have been done. And if it's presented as such that you contrast the previous one and show that it's in line with it, that would help me a great deal. Rather than saying that and resting on that assurance, in preparation of the material that you're going to present, if you show the consistency between something that's been approved and asked for approval, I'm much more inclined to go with that.
So thank you for explaining about the CARES 2 allowing for the money to cover operational budget. I think, I know because when I viewed that through the state portal, I also was, and I've heard this from constituents, that they were pretty shocked when you look at Deming or Lordsburg or Silver, they have the same access to the portal, and are, like Mr. Guadiana said, we have a huge chunk towards administration. And so maybe if we can, because I know we had talked about, is the CARES 2 grant application on our website? No. Maybe just for the sake of transparency, trying to explain, I don't know how much work this might be, but I know I did receive messages and calls about that same portal, the graph you can go to. And so maybe being able to explain what it was used for, just to ease the minds of our community members.
And Any other comments?
Ms. Varela, can you just go over those differences between the original and the revision again?
Big differences maybe with some of the amounts, like in the internet access. And the two biggest differences are the SEL teacher at the elementary is now included. That was not on the original. And 3 EA positions are included in this original. I'm sorry, in the revised that were not in the original. In the original, we had, we did have some, let me see, hold on. I'm getting confused with my 2 papers here. In the original application, we did have $513,000 for additional salaries, and that was to maintain operating of employing existing staff. We did take some of those staff. We had a nurse, partial social worker, 3 teachers. We moved them back into operational. Fully operational instead of
So
grant
that's where
funded.
you're able to secure those additional funds for
Mhm.
that
That-
social emotional
yes.
in those 3 years?
Mhm.
Okay.
And again, that was, having conversations with principals as we started working on budget. I sent them all an email, what are your needs? If you could have anything you wanted, what would be your biggest wish? And that was the response that I got from all elementary principals, and so we included that.
So that was 513, right? All right. And then was there anything, I think you said something else, right? Or was that it? Am I confused?
The amount for the kickboard professional development did increase from the first one to the second one. We had some money for social emotional curriculum in the original one, but we did get a social emotional grant for Bayard and Hurley. So they are purchasing some of the social emotional curriculum that we'll be needing at the elementary, so that's why we took it out. I put a little bit more money in the after-school tutoring because knowing that both SNAL and Cobre, not after school, in the summer program, because knowing that SNAL and Cobre both want to offer something, I try to put enough in there to cover both schools. Oh, the other thing that we had in the original one was 20, 40, 52,000 for the air filters. We didn't need that here because we got those 2 additional grants that covered 40,000 of it, and then the rest of it went to CARES 2. So we took that out of CARES 3, which again helps support the SEL teacher. And other than that, I think everything else was the same.
Could we get a breakdown of the 513,000 at a later date?
That was on the original, it's not on this one.
I understand.
On the original, it was 26,000 for an EA at Foy Daycare, 71,000 for attendant success coach, 70,000 for a nurse, 25,000 for a partial social worker, 30,000 towards myself, 74,000 towards teacher A, 86,000 towards teacher B, 86,000 towards teacher C, and 45,000 towards Mr. Peruz. That's what was on the original. But again, we moved them back. We moved all the teachers to operational. And again, it doesn't mean that Mr. Peru and I are getting a raise. It just means we're being split funded through different funding sources.
Other comments? You have a recommendation, Ms. Barrera? You did? I'm sorry. Okay. Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Okay, one opposed. Motion carries. Moves us to unfinished business.
Under unfinished business, we do have an update on the superintendent search by Mr. John Bash.
Good evening,
Good evening.
board members and members of the audience. Thank you for the opportunity to serve you and your community with the superintendent search. Just before the spring break, the board made the decision to proceed with the search and our last discussion here in a public meeting, and so that very next day we launched into our engagement phase. And I think our friends in the back are working on putting up some slides for me from a Google slide presentation that I'm going to walk you through and bring you the update. So the update for this week for the board will be here tonight, and then I will be emailing this to you as well, so you have a hard copy of the document. As they're working on that, I want to let you know I spent the day today in Cobre School District, and I just have to say how impressed I am with the expertise and the dedication of so many different people I worked with. And all of the people today were either some of you, and I did wrap up all of our individual board interviews now, but mostly staff. And I met with district staff. I met with your principal group today. I had the opportunity even to visit with a small group of teachers, and we're scheduling a follow-up meeting for teachers again tomorrow at 4:15 so they can come. Looks like we're still working on it. Without exception, it's clear to me in working and listening to your groups, because that's what we're doing right now is listening sessions. There's a deep level of passion and commitment people have to the children of this community, and that's where I hear a lot of unity, that people feel strongly and passionate around here about doing whatever it is that's possible to support the students in this community and this school district. So what's also clear is there are a wide range of opinions regarding how we might go about doing that, and that probably doesn't surprise you either, and that's not unique to this community. So it looks like we're up. If you want to go ahead and advance to the next slide, we'll jump right in. So, oh, there we go. All right. They even gave me a remote. All right, so we also kicked off with advertising. So the position announcement you approved to launch within our original planning meeting. I did send to the New Mexico School Board Association, the Coalition of Educational Leaders in New Mexico. It's on your district website. We got that up very quickly. Hazard Young, Atea and Associates, my firm, we got that posted there. And that's also where applicants can find the application link to start an application if they wish. At the recommendation of Director Murillo, I also reached out to the Silver City Daily Press and requested a press release, and they did follow through with that. I had to bird dog them with a couple phone calls, but they were responsive, and I appreciated their help. While it wasn't on the front page, which was my hope, it at least made it in there in the Tuesday edition this last week. I also want to thank your superintendent for requesting communication also at the school level and reminders for folks not only to look at the website but also participate in what will be the very first community forum this evening following the board meeting at 6:30 p.m. But a second one that we're hosting remotely tomorrow night so that those who aren't able to come in person have that opportunity as well. And that lines up with what we talked about doing during our planning meeting. Director Guadiana, you had recommended reaching out to the universities. You see them listed here. I was successful in getting the posting to them. I received one response where they actually distributed it to faculty that are working with candidates in leadership programs. The other I have not heard back from yet, so I will follow up and see where it's at, but those are out. And so a very good exposure, and again, it's still out there cooking, so I hope to get some more response in the coming weeks. Right button, right? There we go. Higher. All right. So how are we going about recruiting? Well, I just mentioned the advertising, but in addition to that, and I shared this with some of the groups I met with today, one thing we do is look at your surrounding districts in the region. Some of them were actually mentioned tonight. And we look at specific positions and do targeted emailing to candidates that might be in a principal position, a director position, an assistant superintendent position. And my message to them is, greetings. Want to bring this leadership opportunity to your attention, and if you're interested, please feel free to reach out to me. And I also mentioned to folks who are hardworking during the day that I'm available in the evenings to take calls if they would like to visit. If they're not interested, we also ask them to pass it along to colleagues they may have. And that's one strategy where we do often get at least some response or at least some curiosity. People may call and want to know more about it. And so I've been working on that all last week and a little bit the week before. I have some follow-up to that that I'm working on, and you'll see that on the right-hand side. And I apologize, the print's a little small for you there, so I'll interpret. Before I go to the right side, I mentioned HYA Network. So I've conducted multiple searches this season. I have a list of names that only grows. And so if candidates were not selected or chose to pull their name from another search, I also pull from that list people that I think might be a good fit, a good match for you, and send them the position announcement as another marketing tactic. So the results to date, I've made a total of 14 candidate contacts, either outreach by me via email or phone. So far, I've had 2 folks contact me, and we've had extended visits, and they have verbalized their intent to apply for the position. I believe those 2 are probably waiting until we wrap up the engagement phase and publish the leadership profile report so they have a more specific picture of what it is you and your community are looking for in the next superintendent. I had 6 folks decline. Some of those declines were via email, and the reasons were varied. So, and this is not unusual at all. I'll have some people say, gosh, thank you for reaching out and thinking of me. I'm happy where I'm at, or I have 3 children in the school system here, and this is the wrong time for me to be, looking for a position. This is all normal part of recruiting. So I'm transparent with you around, while there's 6 that declined, that's usually the attrition rate with this kind of outreach that we see, so this is pretty normal. I had 4 report to me that they're under contract, meaning they don't have even the option unless they wanted to resign their position, which professionally is a risk. So they shared that of the 6, and then 2 just simply were not interested at this time. I mentioned follow-up. I have 5 that haven't responded yet to the messages. And again, this is just from just over a week's worth of outreach work. I will be doing more outreach work, so these numbers will change. The top number will grow. Any questions on recruiting before I continue? Yes, sir.
Which was the university that passed on the information? It was just UNM and NMSU.
Right. NMSU was the one that pushed it out. Yeah.
Okay, so they're local. They were closer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I should mention it during the listening session, visits that I do, the last question I ask is, do you know of anybody I should be reaching out to, just like I did with you all? And so I'm gathering names that way too. Okay, up high. All right, today I will have, after the community forum, hosted 7 additional sessions. Last week, I was able to do 10 listening sessions, and I primarily targeted the community folks that you all identified. City leaders, Grant County Commissioner, law enforcement officials. I spoke to a couple of business leaders that you had identified. And obviously those were all remote sessions, but very productive, and I learned a great deal there. And the main reason I targeted that subset was because spring break was here, so I really didn't have access to a lot of staff. And so that's why this week, especially today and tomorrow, really focused heavily on staff engagement. So today I had 2 board members, as I mentioned, district level staff, principals. I got some feedback from elementary teachers that the time might have been a little early for them, so we invited them, and the union president is helping me. He said he would send a group email out for me tonight, letting all teachers know that they can come to the 4:15 session here tomorrow if that works better in their schedule, and if they can't, encourage them to participate in this survey. Tomorrow, 5 more listening sessions. I have a community leader coming in, a parent that had made a specific request early on. I'm meeting with classified staff, secondary, it says secondary teachers, but that'll be that all teacher session at 4:15, and then our virtual community forum will wrap that up. What we have pending right now, and Joyce assisted me with this morning, we have parent advisories at each school, as I understand it, and so we have set aside a time slot tomorrow, and so any parent advisory representatives that want to come at that time can. And then I've also, in my meeting with principals today, I shared with them that I am willing to schedule virtual sessions with any parents that are part of that advisory group if they would like. And so they have my contact information, and that's why the status there is pending. So this...
John, on that?
Sure.
Since we invited and included that parent advisory group, can you revise the schedule? And since that other one is going to also include all teachers, all certified staff, can you revise it with those 2, and then we'll just send it out?
Sure, we can
totally
do
again?
that.
Okay.
You bet. Yeah. Any questions on engagement? All right, so this is kind of the final big push for engagement this week, and I'll get to some next steps here in a moment. Okay, I'm going as high as I can. I know I'm not that tall. There we go. Did I miss one? Nope.
I think the computer's actually over there,
All right. Some other search updates. One of the services we provide to the board is some data collection around superintendent salary and benefit data. Why do we do this? Because the board at some point here will need to determine which of you will serve as representatives of the board in negotiating a contract with a person that you select. In engaging in those discussions, it'll also be important for the entire board to consider what you're comfortable with in terms of a salary and benefit package for the next superintendent. From a candidate perspective, the reason I'm sharing this with you is the vast majority of superintendent candidates will expect to be offered a package that's in the same range as either similar size district superintendents are receiving and or similar package to districts in your region. So for that reason, what I'm working on in terms of my homework right now is I've sent records requests to Deming, Lordsburg, and Silver City for their current superintendent contract documents, including any pathway to compensation. That means stipends, any pathway to money so that I give you a very transparent picture of what people are currently making. And so it's an apples to apples comparison. Cobre's been transparent in actually posting the superintendent contract right to your website, so I found that there. And I'll get some, because Joyce is an interim, I'll be getting some clarification from her on how this works over her contract extended over 1 year, so I want to make sure I fully understand that before I prepare a document and a summary for the entire board. I will be sending similar records requests starting Wednesday to the districts you see listed there. So how did I arrive at those districts? Well, I went to the most recent enrollment report I could find at the New Mexico Public Education Department website. And this is an FTE figure, not a head count. And so you see 4 districts that show as smaller than Cobre, and I included Cobre there at 1,082, and then 4 districts that show as larger. And so the strategy here is pretty logical. I'm looking at a range of districts that kind of capture Cobre's student enrollment, which is a very common approach, to give you an idea of, okay, where does Cobre stack up in terms of superintendent salary and benefit package in that mix. So I hand the data to you. I'll do some averaging for you as well. And then the idea is that you can use that information to inform your decision on what seems fair. Most boards will take a look at that and say, okay, well, we can look at some averages, but John, doesn't it also matter what kind of experience the person has that we select? Yes, it does. Doesn't it matter what kind of education they might have? Yes, it does. And what also matters is it is called negotiation. So whoever you select will also have an idea of what they would like to see in a package and a total amount. And as elected officials, I would also tell you your community typically has an interest in this as well, wanting to know how you justify what it is you pay the highest paid person in a school district. That's the other reason I provide you with data, because this data is often what you need to respond to in terms of, as a board, we decided on this package and it is in this neighborhood in terms of what other districts are paying, and so we want to be competitive, but we also don't want to be way too low or the highest, right? You can justify something that's within the range, and that will be our recommendation to you as you consider where you want to be, is somewhere in the range. In a future discussion, we'll need to talk about how the board wants to go about determining who will be authorized by all 5 of you to engage in negotiations. To clarify, the entire board has to take action on the approval of a contract package. And so the other strong recommendation we make to any school board is that you consult with your legal counsel before approving any employment document with a superintendent.
Before you move on
Sure.
that, can you clarify which ones you're going to get the comparison? Is it going to just be Silver City, Lordsburg, and Deming, or is it including the ones, the statewide size?
Yep, all those A and B, all those districts, yeah.
Okay.
And I was just clarifying that in Group A there, I already have those. In fact, I received some of those today. But in Group B, I haven't had a chance yet to request those, so when I have my first cup of coffee on Wednesday, I'm going to tackle that, okay?
Thank you.
All right. Is he going to hit the button for me? There we go. All right. So I talked about data. And this slide is really intended to get you thinking more than anything else, that in the negotiation process and in the recruiting process, candidates will often ask, well, where is the board at, John, with salary range? And so you had already approved language in the initial posting that said that the board is prepared to offer a competitive rate, but it does not lock you into any specific number. We did not put a salary range in the posting. We just indicated that the board is committed to providing a competitive package similar to districts in the region based on education and experience. So we've left you ample wiggle room to determine what that would be. They also want to know about contract term. What's that mean? That's typically the number of years that you're willing to commit to, and that the candidate is willing to commit to. It's typically in the range of 2 to 3 years. I know there's been some discussion occasionally around, well, John, but if we go 2 to 3 years and it doesn't work out, then we have to buy somebody out, and that's a liability for the district. Certainly, I understand that logic, but I also prepare the board for a candidate's perspective, which is if you're expecting me to commit to your district, move my family, quit the job I have, which I'm secure with, then the negotiation in terms of a two-way conversation is really around commitment. So I'm not asking for decisions tonight. That's why I'm just planting these seeds with you to get you thinking around, okay, what are you as individual board members, as a collective board, willing to commit to with your next superintendent in terms of a length of a contract or contract term? And what do you anticipate any candidate would come at you with in terms of an expectation of, gosh, if I'm your selection, what kind of commitment are you willing to make for me? And often, the one consideration on the candidate side, especially if they're not from the area, is it takes at least a 6-month window just to meet everybody, get to know what is in transition. And so certainly there has to be some clarification and transition conversations early in a new superintendent's tenure regarding what you all expect that person to deliver on in their first year. And I would say this, there's all kinds of ways to structure a contract with a superintendent to put guardrails in or protections for both the candidate and for the board. And so when we get there, if the board is interested in concepts that we've seen in other districts for those kinds of things based on your interests, I'm happy to spend time with you on that. Know also that occasionally during negotiations, candidates will contact us and say, gosh, you know, I'm struggling with this particular piece. It seems the board is resolute about this expectation. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that. The role we play in no way is to negotiate for you. Instead, our interest is in seeing the two parties reach an agreement. And so if we perceive there might be any kind of snag, then we come up with ideas that are simply what ifs. You know, what if both parties were to consider something like this or this idea? And you're in no way obliged to take the idea. It's just we're trying to be helpful. All right, and then I mentioned transition time, and what that means is, let's say you make a selection at the end of April or early May, which is the timeline we've mapped. That still leaves a little bit of time before the end of the school year or that July 1 official start date. If somebody's available, are you willing to invest a little bit of money for that person to come and spend some time in Cobre before the school year's over, to meet some people, get a jump start essentially on the relationship building, the transition work, learning the lay of the land before they just appear in July and wonder what's happening. Often those transitions also include individual meetings with board members, much like I've just done as part of this search. And then I mentioned evaluation, that any superintendent during the contract negotiation phase is going to ask about how their evaluation works. At a minimum, they're going to want to know, when am I evaluated and what's that process look like? If there's been any question marks around superintendent performance in a district, often we'll have candidates want to propose more specific language in a contract regarding their evaluation. For example, I have seen many candidates propose that there be a meeting in the summer, July or August, with a board where they will outline the goals together. What's expected of the superintendent in terms of specific goals for that evaluation period? And then a discussion around evidence. What evidence will the board be looking for to determine whether or not the superintendent has delivered on those expectations, those goals? And the whole idea there is no surprises, that at the end of the year, if for some reason the board's not happy with the superintendent's performance, they want that to be tied to something that's established up front. Typically in a superintendent's first year, there's also at least one mid-year review meeting where they get kind of a dipstick read from the board on how am I doing. And a practice I often recommend is that the superintendent should also be doing a self-assessment and providing that to the board, and providing the board evidence that I'm making progress on this, I haven't started on that yet because it's only January, things like that, so that you have a read from the superintendent on that they're monitoring their progress towards these common goals you set. And then typically in the late winter or early spring, you do the evaluation. And typically in the spring, if it is a 2-year contract, many candidates will ask to revisit the contract term at that time, particularly if they have done a good job and your performance evaluation is positive. It goes back to that commitment conversation. So I'm providing you some of these details so that I give you some think time and some processing time before we get there. If you're interested in some ideas on any of these provisions in a contract, I'm happy to share that with you. Any questions?
Mr. Bash, I know I should have asked you this question when we did our individual, but when you keep on mentioning region, can you describe that region?
Oh, sure. In terms of salary comps,
That, and then I think we were talking about searches, and you're saying within region, I've had X amount of interest or talks or something like that. And so if you could just give the description of the region that you're talking about.
okay, yeah. I'm going to go to the state comps because I literally went to a state listing of all districts in New Mexico. So that's truly a state region, and I looked only at student enrollment. So that's where that came from. In terms of region, the New Mexico Department of Ed has a map, and because I'm learning my New Mexico geography, that was really helpful. So I found Cobre, and I did the circle around it. But I also, as I mentioned to you before, I read news coverage of the district going back quite some time, and the districts in that Group A are often districts that are that you're compared to for a variety of purposes, because some of them call that collection of districts kind of the mining district zone, or I think I found one story on the silver superintendent and the salary decisions that board was making, and they compared the silver superintendent salary to Cobre, Deming, and Lordsburg. And so that's where I came up with it. It may not be complete, but and I'm happy if you want me to keep that circle going, I can do that.
Just to give me a good idea of that's all.
Yeah. Okay.
Information only. Thank you, sir.
In terms of that circle, I think adding Hatch to that would be the one that's most demographically similar to us.
Okay. Can do. It's just an email I can send, and then I just add it to the data, so I can add that for you.
Thank you. You have it on the B.
Oh, I had it on B. Well,
Yeah.
there you go. I'll put them in B, and then if you want me to put that data with the A group,
I would appreciate
I can do that.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I think that's the last slide, unless you had. Nope. Just kidding. I'm not going to read this to you. You have this in your materials from our planning meeting, but I just put it in front of you so you can see coming attractions. March 28th, I will be remotely presenting to you in your work session the leadership profile report. After that, we continue recruiting, and as I find candidates, I do some pre-screening, reference checking, that kind of thing. April 7th is our application deadline. And then on April 11th, you have a board meeting scheduled. Joyce shared with me that you would like similar updates in your upcoming board meetings, so I have marked my calendar to be joining you on April 11th. Again, I will likely be remote on that day, unless I can make it out here, because on that day I'll also be presenting to you a slate of candidates. And ahead of that meeting, I'll probably be providing you with some access to resumes and cover letters that I have from anybody who has submitted a completed application, so that you can look at those. We have earmarked 2 different weeks for interviews. We have a first round the week of April 18th and a finalist round the week of April 25th. You also have a board meeting scheduled on April 25th. And so some boards like to leave their business meeting alone so that Joyce and her team still have access to you and access to an agenda to conduct district business. So we may want to work around that date for interviews. Depending on the number of completed applicants that we have, the board may wish to consolidate 2 rounds of interviews into 1. And so when I present the candidate slate, I will be asking you that question as we take a look at what we have in terms of completed applications. So if you did consolidate, I assume that the board would want to maintain an open process that involves your stakeholders, and at the interview planning part of our discussion during the workshop, we'll be presenting to you some ideas on how to involve your stakeholders in meeting candidates, whether it's at the finalist round or if you go to a single round of interviews. That's what we'd call it, finalist candidates. And then late April, early May, we need to decide together how you want to and when you would like to announce the selection of the next superintendent. Typically, that announcement is made contingent upon negotiation of an employment contract. Any questions on the calendar?
March 28th for next board, is that during the board, actual board meeting that's at 5?
What's that?
Where it says school board work session, is that a work session that you're having with the board during the open board meeting? What, can you give me a little bit more clarification on that?
On which date?
March 28th.
Oh, March 28th. That typically takes around 30 minutes for me to present that report. So that can be during a regular meeting.
Okay.
I put a
that's
work
just what I
session there.
needed
I'm
to
sorry
see.
if that threw you, but
Yeah, no, okay. So we already have you on the agenda for next week as a superintendent search update?
okay.
Is that fine?
I can do it
Okay,
right then.
okay, okay.
So that'll work. Thank you. Joyce keeps me honest. All right, and with that, I want to thank the 2 gentlemen in the back, help with technology. I've asked them for technical help here, not only today, but my last visit here. So thank you, gentlemen, for your assistance. And I'm sorry I'm not really good on the clicker yet. I'll get better. All right, I think that's it for me, unless there's more questions.
Jada?
All right.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Any other questions? Motion to adjourn. We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.